New York City is forcing out its middle class forever.
It is very sad for renters in New York.
Prices in Manhattan are up again this month to an average of more than $5,100.
Finds half of all city households don't make enough money to meet the minimum cost of living in New York City, which means more than 30% of household income is going towards rent.
The average rent in Manhattan now over $5,200 a month.
A recent study found that housing costs have increased the most in New York between 2011 to today. Housing costs have increased more than 68%. Just a few months ago, the average rent hit a new record of $5,588 a month. That represented a 30% increase compared to 2019. This is defying any initial expectations, as New York saw 400,000 population drop between 2020 and 2022. Many renters chose to stay despite a 30 to 40% increase to rent last year. After taxes, the average salary in New York is roughly $66,000. That equates to roughly $5,514 a month. The median household income comes to $74,694 a year. The median household income does increase when focusing on Manhattan, with a household average of $95,866. To comfortably afford rent for a one-bedroom, you would need to earn $139,800 a year. Here you can see that New York far exceeds any other city, requiring $19,000 more than San Francisco and Miami. With average rents exceeding $60,000 a year and yearly median incomes averaging $66,000 a year, living solo in Manhattan seems impossible and only a luxury for the few. A recent study found that since the 1960s, inflation-adjusted rents have gone up a whopping 64%, while at the same time, real household incomes have risen by 18%. Now let's look back to the 1980s. In New York, this graph shows that inflation-adjusted renter incomes in New York City have increased around 22% since the 1980s. However, average rent in New York City has increased more than 70% over that time. The average in America was a rise of 34%. On average, you'll need $1,298 to live comfortably in New York. However, this is excluding rent, which last year averaged out at over $5,000 a month. And of course, this is suggesting that you live very modestly. Depending on lifestyle, your living expenses in New York will vary. The average cost of living in New York City for a family of four is around $9,639. All of this is, of course, assuming that you don't own a car, which could add an additional $500 plus to that budget. Let's see how New York City stacks up against another expensive city, being London. Both New York and London are very desirable cities to live in. While an average one-bedroom could cost $3,700 in New York, the same comparable apartment would cost $2,600 in London. However, what's the most staggering difference is that groceries are nearly 70% more expensive in New York than London. Another study found that moving from New York to Miami could save you $195,000 in living costs and taxes. Financial information provider Smart Asset analyzed how much people raking in six figures in cities like New York, San Francisco, and Chicago would save if they moved to Miami. A Manhattan resident with a $650,000 salary would save $195,000 because of Florida's lack of a state income tax and cheaper cost of living. Workers with a $650,000 salary in New York face an effective tax rate of 45% in New York. When you include federal, state, and local taxes, which drops to 35% as Miami resident. The same person making $150,000 could save nearly $50,000 by moving to Miami, according to the study. A New Yorker's cost of living would also be reduced tremendously if they moved out of Manhattan, where the average overhead is 137% above the national average. This presents a problem. Half of New York's households don't have enough money to have an apartment, access to sufficient food, and basic health care. 50% of working-age New Yorkers are struggling to cover basic needs. This equates to over 1 million households. The percentage of households struggling to afford basic needs was higher than any other year in the report's two-decade history of studying the cost of living. The report found that households need to bring in at least $100,000 a year to afford food, housing, and transportation, and a family of 4 needs to bring in $150,000. New York City residents need to earn at least $312,000 to get that 6-figure feel. If you only made the once desired $100,000 salary, this would translate to about 41% in combined federal, state, and local taxes, and a cost of living 83% higher than the national average. Bloomberg once stated that in New York, a $100,000 salary would feel like a $36,000 salary. When analyzing the 76 largest U.S. cities to see how far $100,000 went, New York came in last, followed closely by Honolulu and San Francisco. A once desirable 6-figure salary now barely making ends meet in New York City. A study reported that roughly 545,000 residents left New York for other states in 2022. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, this New York trend reflects a larger trend in the U.S. that has been happening for the past several years. The top 4 states that New Yorkers moved to were Florida, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. Florida saw the largest influx of New Yorkers in 2022. It's wild when you're seeing titles stating that people making $170,000 a year are forced to move out of New York City due to how expensive it is. New York City is a very expensive city to live in. We are seeing the middle class forced out as it becomes much more unlivable. Despite its opportunities and luxuries the city provides, it asks the question as to why would you live there? Even if you were able to make ends meet, you would have nothing to propel your financial future. Let us know below in the comments what you think about New York City, and would you ever want to live there?